delighted and thrilled. Again, thank you for being here. This is what a phenomenal meeting this has been. I mean, just amazing to have this great panel. And this is the star of the show right now. All of these three guys are. So, first of all, Andrew Gitkin from Leerink, Cameron Taylor from Bank of America, and Anupam Dalal from Makita. So let's just dive into it. So Andrew, please go ahead and interrupt. This is a lively panel. Disagree, fight, punch, whatever you want to do. Everything is allowed out here. But first question. Andrew, let me start with you. So in most fields, things are fairly predictable, right? You get a great product, a great target, you get patients, you get pricing, capital starts flowing, and then there's M&A, and then things just get going like that. That happens in oncology, that happens in rheumatology, that's happening in obesity right now, right? We see that all the time. Not so predictable with us, not in retina. We really thought that after the end of last year, everything was set, and we started seeing some M&As, and then we thought that was going to start that engine. What happened?
So, first off, great to be back at OIS. I don't think I've been here in a couple of years, so Craig, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm not going to promise any fights, so... But
if there were, would I pick you?
Only if we're arguing about fees, and then we fight.
Yeah, right. So I think, I like to, it's a great question, and I like to sort of take a step back, and it maybe ties into some of the discussions that Emmett was leading on the last panel, which I thought was great as well. And that is, when you really step back, and just by show of hands, how many people think there's more than 50 blockbuster drugs right now? How about 75?
Just ophthalmology.
No, in general.
Oh.
Just general. Blockbuster drugs, so $1 billion or more, 100. 150. There's 155 blockbuster drugs. How many in ophthalmology? Over under 5. Who's got the under? Raise your hand. 2. There's 5. 4, technically, and there's probably one more that's private that we think is there. So that sort of ties into a lot of what you're talking about, Pravin, which is why is there not more M&A? I think there has to be a belief that there's a blockbuster potential. And of the ones in ophthalmology, 3 of them are VEGF. So, which explains why the Iveric deal I think was so well received. Novel mechanisms. So I think it's about broadly bringing in new targets that are validated, that target large markets, and create blockbuster potential, in short. And we just, right now, haven't seen that just yet. But the good news is, if it's going to happen, it's in with the people in this room and in this target area.
So, Cameron, I understand what Andrew is saying, but here's the part that's a little bit confusing to me. Is it that I realize what he said about the blockbuster drugs, but that's always been the case, right? What's changed now, though?
There, I would say, 10 years ago were other pharma players for whom a $250 million drug or a $500 million drug really moved the needle and made a big difference. I think the evolution of the anti-VEGF therapies very much changed the way that people looked at what a successful drug could be in this category. And some of those companies for whom that was a big drug were then acquired and part of now much larger organizations. And so you've seen in some instances, a lack of desire to do, let's just say, a smart deal that fits within a category that makes sense from the commercial perspective that can just slot into the bag. But the honest truth is also there haven't been many innovations within the retina to even see that many other drugs, right? That after that list of the anti-VEGF therapies, how many other things have actually truly been clinically successful and introduced that do 100 million or 200 million. And so there has been
there just haven't been a lot of successful innovations.
There has been a lot of innovation. We've seen a lot of clinical failures as well, right? And true biotech risk sets in. And I think there's still a lot of good work that's being done, but there have admittedly been, a string of failure. But then we saw the GA therapies; those have come through. You have multi-billion-dollar exits and companies, and that reinforces more investment into the field. So I think we'll see more of it, but there has been a lull that has sort of been dominated by the anti-VEGFs.
So Anupam, I'm listening to Andrew, I'm listening to Cameron, and I'm sitting here with great innovative ideas, but I'm a small company. What does that mean to me? Does that mean that I've got to wait until I grow, and if I'm lucky enough to grow to be really big, until maybe the stage of commercialization before I can even think of an exit? Because I think what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that, yeah, the blockbuster drugs have been about the same, but now the strategic market has shrunk and they're waiting longer and longer to de-risk themselves. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, a couple comments. First of all, I mean, M&A can occur at any, I've been on panels with Cam before. We've talked about small M&A. We've talked about large M&A. Large M&A in this space is going to occur at the intersection of major market opportunities. This is a theme that's come up again and again today with pretty de-risked assets. So where are those intersections in retina? It's in primarily GA and neovascular disorders. That's it, right? Neovascular disorders, we really only have one target. That's VEGF. I mean, we can debate the Tie2 pathway. I mean, it's an interesting debate, but right now we're target poor. And in GA we have complement, and we only have one company that represents a de-risked asset. That's Apellis. Iveric is gone, as you know. So I don't think it's that complicated, but there's incredible innovation happening in this room that's going to progress and mature and be funded and get to a point in the future. But we're not there right now. Now, if you're talking about any form of M&A, right? I think we've seen ophthalmology companies get bought at every point along the value chain, from phase 1 data to all the way to approved products like you guys had.
But in retina, less and less, right? At that early stage. I mean, how many companies, let's talk about retina, because that's obviously the most important thing in ophthalmology and all of medicine. But how many companies do you really know of that have been bought at that early stage recently? I hear what you're saying, but I would push back and say that we're seeing, and again, please correct me, any of you guys, a smaller strategic pool that's moving more and more to the right to de-risk themselves. I'm trying to understand what that means to all of my colleagues here, who are not in Apellis.
No, I agree with that. It's a good point. I mean, I think besides the existing players in ophthalmology right now, I think there are, for us, we're aware of two large pharmas that actually do have essentially a stealth retina portfolio that is waiting to be unlocked or unleashed, but they need an anchor asset. So we're getting back to, we need a large de-risked, probably a wet AMD, kind of a novel anti-VEGF or something that works in GA. But again, besides Apellis, we are very far away from that. So it's tough.
I would think, though, that also robust clinical proof of concept, not necessarily only having finished phase 3. I think Stargardt's another area where it's massive. There's no approved therapy. It's a genetic disease. There are a lot of companies that are going after that. You can think about, we've heard a lot about retinitis pigmentosa, different ways of targeting it, but it's still a large patient pool. Still, pharma is going to be most focused, as they are in immunology, on the biggest diseases that are millions and millions of people. But I still think there are going to be areas where you can have higher pricing or specific differentiation that's going to create a market. And so where the companies have to think through is what type of clinical trial design are they going to go through that gets them through, yes, proving that this works, but also that the payers are going to pay for it.
Andrew?
Yeah, I think I sort of look at it similarly, but maybe would offer, some of the following, which is, I think it's very important to recognize the fact that we have seen a pretty significant shift, and I know the last panel said it, a very significant shift from the strategics away from ophthalmology. They've gotten out of it completely, or when you talk to them, it's been deprioritized, or it's prioritized in certain factions of a company, but not elsewhere. And so understanding where decisions are made and understanding, which group within a big organization is going to make the final call. And I think, at least I'm sure from my perspective, and I would imagine with Cameron as well, we've probably been involved in processes where one group is a champion, only to sort of, get, not through another committee because it's not on strategy. So I think, so what does that mean? You go back to what does it mean for the innovators in this room? It means that you have to finance your company for the long run. There's a vintage of companies that are out there that were really started around a very single product opportunity, maybe not a platform, not a technology, maybe not even a real deep understanding of a target, but it was meant more for de-risking. And I don't think that's the path towards M&A, at least not significantly sized M&A. Otherwise, you're in the game of singles and doubles, and that's a big part of ophthalmology as well. And you see it in devices, you see it maybe front of the eye, it's more singles and doubles. But if we're talking about transformative M&A, that's tone setting, that signifies, maybe a risk tolerance. You're seeing that in other sectors, not in ophthalmology right now. And I agree with what Emmett was saying earlier. I think that promise holds here, and it will happen. It's just a matter of science coming of age. And I think one of the nice things that at least that I love about ophthalmology is there is a great collaboration, I think, amongst the investment community, the strategics that are here today. They want to be helpful. I think one of the tools that could be used, and I would, if you're an innovator in this room and you're thinking about what am I supposed to do with, the interest rates going up, right? And if you overlay the indices with interest rates, right? We've seen what's happened in the capital raising environment. Strike partnerships with strategics potentially earlier. Let them know what you're working on. It's okay to take capital from strategics. In fact, they want to invest in many cases and do so without M&A encumbrances. That's another way of getting capital to fund an idea that could be transformative.
So, and I know you're giving the right answers, all of these three are, but since I know you so well, you're going to push back a little bit because I want you to give us practical answers for my colleagues over here. Those are all true and they're great, but I'm sitting here with the traditional folks of raising capital by going IPO. I was about to say IPA, but
that's what happens when you're the last panel of the day.
It's almost there. It's just a door away, but it's IPO, not IPA. So that the IPO market is just not right for a lot of these companies, and they're struggling for capital. So that's many of the great innovators out here, many of the great companies out here, and I hear what you're saying about doing partnerships with strategics. That's not so easy, first of all. The other thing also is that once you do that, aren't you kind of locked in a little bit with them, and your leverage is a little bit limited? I guess my question to you is, if I'm sitting there struggling for capital, I was hoping for an IPO, and this is not the right time, what can you advise me about attaining capital and recapping my org chart or anything like that?
Well, when I said partnership, I was talking about more or less with the venture arms to some extent. So getting capital, and it's almost like an off-balance sheet funding mechanism for the for companies. So I think the IPO market is not there right now. I think virtually almost every IPO year to date is down, and it's not much prettier if you go back the last couple of years. And with the election coming up later this year, that introduces more volatility into that conversation. I think what we saw earlier this year about financing, which was very interesting, if you want to get very precise about it, when folks thought that the Fed was going to get rates to around 4%, 4.25%, we were never busier. It went to 4.5%, 4.75%, 5%. Our business shut down on equity raising. So that gives you a very specific number, and some of that was pent up demand coming into this year. But when you put it through the models, that sort of works out when you look at returns and risk-adjusted returns. It begins to work a lot of times for risk-taking around that number. So until we get back there, until the IPO class starts performing well, and you're at least 20% type of returns on IPOs, we're not going to see that. So by very definition, and I think we all know this in the room, funding is very, very tight right now. So I think you have to be more flexible. And that flexibility includes taking capital from corporates, and maybe it comes with some encumbrance, but at least you're getting an idea invested. And if it really is significant and worth the investment, there'll still be strategic interest, even if there's some that may have their foot in the door.
Anupam, Cam, go ahead.
So I think Anupam, you can opine, but I think it's the specifics of what a company can do with what's in their power. It's you have a certain limited amount of capital that you have on the balance sheet at any given point in time. I think in some cases you have to think about where can you tighten spend. We've got a lot of clients that are thinking about, okay, if I have to cut here or cut there, or maybe we don't actually move forward this particular critical path item. It's what can you do to actually get to the next point of de-risking, maybe through a pocket of volatility. They're not ideal. And then the other part is just making sure that there's a continued relationship with capital providers and the strategics as well to understand where you fit within that landscape. And so then if things do open up, or when things do open up, that you're ready to strike. So in some cases it's batting down the hatches. I don't think that we're in that bad of a market to be honest, we're still in a market that rewards companies that will get transformational clinical data, but it is not an easy market in which you have to compete, right? It was much easier to raise money in January and February of this year. Yes, it has gotten a lot harder, but still, we think we operate in an environment where if you transform a particular treatment paradigm, there's reimbursement that will be used. I don't know the case always in Europe where they may have a different view, or other parts of the world, but nonetheless, I think making sure that investors know what you're doing and where you're trying to get to, and listening to the other side, listening to strategics of, okay, well, if you do this, then I'm here. That's sort of what you can do and what's within your power.
Anupam, what do you tell you?
Yeah, I'd say that if I had to pick one piece of advice or thought, it's don't be afraid of dilution. I think that, we're all type A people. We want to succeed. We measure ourselves by valuation sometimes. But as I reflect on some of the best things that I've ever been privileged to be a part of as an investor, many of them we had down rounds along the way. And I appreciate in retrospect the CEOs and the senior management of those companies having the vision to say, I know it's painful, guys, to the insider investors. I know it's painful right now for this to be happening, but I'm playing the long game, and we're going to win. And I've never, not once, been in a situation.
Got it right out of my mouth.
Never once have we looked back and said we raised too much, or we raised too low.
I love hearing that. Yeah. That's good. Yes. But I know, actually, the single worst thing that can happen to a biotech company is to run out of money.
So along those lines, let me I heard about the money, but there are other things as well. Financing is fine. Strategy is fine. What I really want to understand from you is take away the market, take away the pipeline, take away pricing, so on and so forth. And Andrew, let me start with you. Just tell me what you've seen great management teams do to be successful.
Yeah, it's basic. I think it's about having a functional a group of leaders who can make decisions. Board dysfunction is value destruction. And if there's one singular loud voice on the board, and your fellow board members, regardless of ownership, socially don't get along or can't control that, there's nothing that we can really do to solve that. And I've seen more than my fair share of companies who've had really good science, really good capabilities, even the right amount of capital, but the management team can't navigate around their board. So to me, when you start talking about the non-financial things, it's really about having not consensus for the sake of consensus, but having a vision, having a group that all sees a similar vision and has similar timelines and expectations of outcome. If you have some folks who want an IPO and others want M&A, good luck navigating that. I think that to me is one of the hallmarks once you get beyond the balance sheet.
I think it's to deeply understand the field in which you're competing, your competitive landscape, and to gather feedback from multiple different points, right? If you're developing an asset and you're focusing on just what the FDA might say, right? This has been something probably more applicable in the front of the eye, where just listening to what the FDA has said doesn't result in any form of reimbursement. And so having an idea of a comprehensive package of where you are going to compete, how you are going to compete, what your competitors are going to be doing, and then what is going to set you apart from the rest of the crowd, and making sure that everyone within management and on the board, to Andrew's point, is aligned and working towards that, with also an ability to pivot quickly should market conditions or the competitive landscape change. And so that unified goal and consistency in message of what you're trying to accomplish, I think, is really important, because then also as you're continuing to have dialogue with anyone on the other side, if they've been hearing that consistent message and focus, comes to play through, and then that gives you the trust to say, okay, I want to give this company $50 million to go and try that out.
I think for any CEO that really wants to seek excellence, I think a general rule of thumb is when you are going to present your first diabetic retinopathy data, try not to have the stock cut in half. That's an inside joke. Inside joke.
Spoken like
The,
a true food critic who's never been a chef.
Too soon. I think my advice, what I'd talk about is, I think the process of acquiring investors and retaining investors is a place where I see two management teams with the same drug or same drug opportunity can wildly outperform one another. To me, and I think it's highly actionable in the process of acquiring investors. Seek out investors that ask tough questions. I think investors that are easy are often easy come, easy go. And then once you have investors, I think putting an absolute premium on execution and putting out timelines that you can hit them reliably. I can't tell you how many times I run into management teams who say, well, we pushed out a goal from Q2 to Q3. Why is everyone freaking out? It's because these are the little things that tell us about predictability. And as soon as you become unpredictable, you become uninvestable. So I'd say that these are, again, highly actionable things. The process of how you interact with investors and the process of getting investors and the process of retaining the investors you have, these are ways you can clearly exceed no matter what drug you have.
By the way, I told him he could say that. Just so that everybody knows, I told him he could say that.
No, you didn't, actually.
Last question for everybody, and then there's time for doors to open after that. Andrew, let me start with you. So your prediction, what's going to happen for the rest of this year and next year? What are we going to see?
In terms of what?
Just the markets.
That's a big question right there.
The retina market.
Yeah. So I think it's funny. I saw something the other day. This year started off very similar like last year, and all the activity we saw in 2024 so far almost mirrored exactly what we saw last year. And I think for the most part, we're going to see 24 be very similar to 23. It sounds like the easy answer to give, but I think there's a number of reasons as to why. I remain generally bullish on M&A, not big ticket multi-billion-dollar M&A, but the singles and doubles that basically Cam referenced earlier. I think it starts with I think there's enough strategics who have enough areas of weakness that can be solved by M&A, and whether you're talking back of the eye or front of the eye or even the device space, some technologies coming of age that will fit that. So I think we're going to continue to still see good activity. I just want to also back up real quickly and just come back to another question you asked. I think one of the things that we can do, and these meetings are very helpful, it's why it's great that Greg puts them on, is try to be really forward-thinking about establishing relationships and awareness of what you're doing with the right investors. And I'm talking let's even talk venture capital in the most traditional way. There's venture capitalists that are true leaders who have conviction of thought, who don't necessarily just invest based upon pattern recognition and following the herd. Stay away from them. Find the ones that are independent, that have conviction, that are willing to look where no one else is looking, and that's your target-rich environment. Getting them to understand your company earlier, your science earlier, funding it so you don't end up in these tough situations where you have a committed group. And I will tell you, we're not going to name names. I'm sure Cam knows them as well as I do. They're not the ones that you think. It's not necessarily the big household, beautiful names that are necessarily the thought leaders. But find those thought leaders, and they exist. And it doesn't have to be in ophthalmology. If they're willing to take risks in other areas and there was a successful exit, go back and look what their early money in was. That maybe when that investment was made was sort of off target or was not in vogue at the time. Those are the ones, particularly for back of the eye, we should be targeting.
So I think that in terms of prediction of what's going to happen, I would think that Emmett, actually, I think I spoke to him maybe 2 years ago about inflation. I've always been a little bit more concerned. Maybe it's just economic background, just the stickiness of inflation, and rates play a real role, with our markets. And, that is still a major focus. And I would say that the Fed has signaled to us, and again, this is not a B of A, this is my view, not our economist, but, the Fed has always been a little bit more dovish than reality. And I think that's something that we have to just plan and hopefully be surprised to the upside. We're still going to see a tremendous amount of M&A. I think within the ophthalmology field, we're going to see a mixture of structured deals. I think strategics will put together thoughtful deals, maybe taking advantage a little bit of the market environment because they do have, in general, some thinner pipelines. But then for those companies that are well capitalized and have the ability to sort of have the wherewithal to say, no, you have to pay this amount of money to get there, I think we'll see some of those as well. We're also probably going to see a fair amount of activity still in all of the other fields, that we normally do in oncology and immunology and the like. I think the IPO market we'll still see, several deals go out, that have the capacity, as well as some perhaps that kind of need the money and need to go out later on in the year. But the expectations for performance, I think, are still more muted. And then, to be honest, with the election, I don't think anybody really knows if the market really shuts down, what people are doing, other than I think everyone will be a little unhappy.
We'll make retina great again.
I think, as it relates to retina, I think GA is a real bellwether for the entire space, and we've talked about some of the M&A themes. I think if I had to isolate on one thing to watch this year, we're watching very keenly, as many other people in the room are. I think it's really IZERVAY, and what happens with IZERVAY, what happens with the traction in the market, what happens with the utilization rates as it relates to SYFOVRE, and in particular, what happens to will IZERVAY maintain a zero rate in vasculitis in the GA population? We were at 50,000 vials. Can they maintain up to 75, 100? If they can, that has incredible repercussions in this space. If they can't, it goes the other way.
So I want to thank all three of you guys, and I just want you guys to know, these are the people that I turn to when I need advice. They really are, all three of them, and these are the best of the best. So this is why they're on the panel, to give you advice, because I turn to them for advice. They're all my friends, all of them, and they've given me nothing but fantastic advice. The last thing I want to mention is I want to thank all of you for being here. This is a long meeting, and you would not stay here if this was just a meeting. And I want to congratulate Craig and Maureen, Faraz, because the reason you're here is that this is a community. You're not being talked to. You're going out there, meeting people, networking, and what they really created. And the reason that this is so successful in a time like this, when things are difficult, when things are unpredictable. And you don't need somebody to talk to you or talk at you. You really need a network. You really need a community. And they've created a community where we can talk to each other, help each other, which will last way beyond this meeting. So thank you. Enjoy the happy hour or the networking, and thank you for being here.